You've been lied to. You were told that if you're kind, people will respect you, that if you're fair, they'll treat you the same, that if you keep your head down, avoid conflict and stay polite, life will reward you. But deep down, you've already felt it. The more you try to be a good person, the less you are seen. The more you give, the more they take. And the more you stay quiet to keep the peace, the louder the world ignores you. No one told you the price of being good was your power. Machiavelli saw it clearly. He wasn't promoting cruelty, he was describing reality. He knew the world doesn't respond to your goodness, it responds to your presence. And if your morality makes you predictable, harmless, forgettable, then it's not virtue, it's a cage. This isn't about becoming cold, it's about waking up. Because the truth is, you've been playing by rules that were never written for your freedom. You've learned to be obedient, not respected, tolerated, not remembered. And if that's starting to feel unbearable, then you're ready. Subscribe now because what comes next will unsettle you, and that's exactly why you need it. Let's begin. You were taught from a young age that being good would be enough, that if you were kind, respectful, obedient, the world would reward you. But over time, you started to notice something strange. The more you tried to please, the more invisible you became. The more you gave, the more people took, without gratitude, without recognition. Because in a world built on competition, appearances and power, being good often means being predictable, controllable, safe, and the safe man is rarely respected. Society doesn't reward kindness, it rewards strategy. Those who rise in life aren't necessarily the most generous, but the most perceptive. The ones who understand that power isn't given to the most deserving. It's claimed by those who know how to play the game, and those who can't see the game. They become pieces on the board, easily used, easily dismissed. The man who tries to be good for everyone ends up belonging to no one, not even himself. His loyalty becomes a leash, his virtue, a vulnerability. Behind every nice guy, there's often a trail of swallowed emotions, missed opportunities, and silent resentment. He bends to avoid conflict. He shrinks to keep the peace. But inside something starts to rot, because deep down he knows he's lying, not out of malice but out of fear. The fear of being rejected, the fear of being called selfish, the fear of not being enough if he stops performing. So he stays good and slowly loses himself in the process. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He didn't mock goodness, but he refused to worship it blindly. In his world, filled with kings, betrayal, and brutal politics, being purely virtuous wasn't just naive, it was dangerous. He observed how easily morality could be weaponized, how leaders who acted with too much heart were devoured by those who knew how to manipulate appearances. Because society doesn't react to your intentions, it reacts to your posture, your control, your authority. And here's the quiet tragedy. The more you try to prove your worth by being agreeable, the more people start to sense they can cross your lines without consequence. They don't respect the good man because he offers no friction, no resistance, no clear signal that his presence demands space. He becomes background noise, reliable, pleasant, and forgettable. Power, in contrast, demands presence. And presence cannot exist where self-betrayal has taken root. But this isn't about becoming cruel. It's about waking up. It's about seeing that your constant effort to be good may be the very thing keeping you small. Because here's the question that starts to burn when you finally stop running from it. What if the image of goodness you've been chasing was never yours to begin with? You think being agreeable makes you admirable, that if you're kind enough, flexible enough, giving enough, people will recognize your value. But here's what actually happens. They start to expect it. Not appreciate it, expect it. Your silence becomes assumed. Your compliance becomes their comfort. And slowly, your identity gets reshaped, not by who you are, but by what others have learned to take from you. What you call goodness, they interpret as weakness. The man who never says no slowly disappears. He becomes the one who always adjusts, always yields, always over-explains. But here's what Machiavelli understood, and what modern psychology confirms. People respect what resists them, not what bends. When you're too eager to please, too quick to accommodate, the people around you stop seeing you as a presence. They see you as a tool, and tools are used, not valued. Submissiveness doesn't inspire loyalty. It invites domination, The more you give without boundaries, the more you signal that your needs come last. And someone will always take that as permission to test how far they can push. In friendships, in relationships, at work, if you don't assert your value, the world will decide it for you. And the world is rarely generous to the man who won't fight for his own worth. Machiavelli never said cruelty was the answer, but he made it clear. A leader who wants to survive cannot be ruled by the need to be liked. He must command, not beg. Influence, not submit. Because in the real world, power is not distributed according to goodness. It's distributed according to utility, to strength, to presence. And the man who lives only to be nice often ends up crushed by those willing to be strategic. So ask yourself, what has your submissiveness actually brought you? Respect, admiration, or quiet resentment and invisible sacrifice? Think of the times you stayed silent just to avoid conflict, the times you gave more than you had, hoping someone would finally see your worth. Did they? Or did you just train them to expect more while offering you less? And here's where it stings. The longer you perform this role, the harder it becomes to break free from it. Because people don't react well when their favorite tool starts saying no. But that discomfort, that resistance, that's not failure. That's proof you're finally taking the crown back from the hands you handed it to. And now, as we need to talk about the man who predicted all of this, and why his name still makes people uncomfortable. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries, branded as a promoter of cruelty, manipulation, even evil. But that's not what he taught. What he offered was something far more dangerous: clarity. He stripped away the comforting illusions about how the world works and told the truth as he saw it, not how things should be, but how they are. Not the fantasy of morality, but the function of power. And if that makes people uncomfortable, it's only because it exposes the games they've been losing without even realizing they were playing. He wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose." Not because love has no value, but because love is fragile. It depends on others. It shifts with opinion, with emotion, with circumstance. Fear, on the other hand, is rooted in control. And in a world full of betrayal, vanity, and ambition, control is not a vice, it's a survival tool. Machiavelli wasn't asking you to be cruel. He was warning you not to be naive. His philosophy is simple. Those who seek to lead, to protect what they've built, to live freely, must understand power as it is, not as it's taught in fairy tales. In the real world, people are not governed by ideals. They're governed by interests, appearances, outcomes. If you want to have influence, you must be seen as useful, as decisive, as willing to do what others won't. And that often means stepping outside the comfort of being seen as good. This doesn't mean you betray your values. It means you choose which values truly serve you, and which ones were implanted to keep you manageable. Machiavelli separated virtue from morality. To him, virtue wasn't about being nice. It was about effectiveness, courage, intelligence, strategic coldness when required. In his words, the world is not governed by goodness but by usefulness. And that's a truth most men are too afraid to admit. But what happens when you begin to live by this clarity? When you stop chasing approval and start wielding discernment, you become unpredictable, unshakable. A man who can smile when needed and strike when necessary, not out of malice but out of wisdom, out of strength. And here's the twist most never see coming. The men who are most feared are often the ones who finally earned the right to be trusted. But before you can lead like this, you have to understand what made you so eager to be liked in the first place. Long before you called yourself a good man, you were a boy trying not to be rejected, trying to earn love, approval, safety. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being yourself wasn't enough, but being agreeable was. So you adapted. You smiled when you wanted to cry. You apologized when you hadn't done anything wrong. You learned to read people's moods like survival instructions, and over time, you started confusing peace with silence and love with obedience. This need to please didn't come from strength, it came from fear. The fear of being seen as difficult, as selfish, as too much. And that fear carved a strategy into your personality. Stay pleasant, stay flexible, stay small. If others are comfortable, maybe they won't leave. If they like me, maybe I'll finally feel worthy. But that strategy has a cost. And the bill always comes later, in exhaustion, in resentment. in the quiet belief that your voice doesn't matter. Machiavelli would call this a failure of strategy, not a failure of character, because in his view, those who lead, even if only their own life, must first stop trying to be loved by everyone. The man who seeks to please all, he warned, ends up pleasing no one, especially not himself. When your identity is built around keeping the peace, you stop knowing what you truly want. Your desires get filtered through the question, will they approve? And here's the trap. The more you give to earn approval, the more approval becomes a condition for your self-worth. You don't just want to be accepted, you need it, you chase it. And that's where control creeps in, because people can sense when you're hungry for validation. And those who crave validation are the easiest to manipulate. You become a man who hands over his power for the illusion of being liked. But there's a way out, and it doesn't require becoming cold or heartless. It begins with honesty, with tracing back the need to please to its origin. Was it a parent who only praised you when you were quiet? A teacher who rewarded compliance over creativity? A partner who called your boundaries selfish? These moments matter, because once you name them, you can stop living according to them. And in that space that you can begin to rebuild. Not a mask, but a center. One that doesn't bend for cheap approval. One that isn't afraid to be seen. And this brings us to the most dangerous truth of all. People don't react to who you are. They react to who you appear to be. You may think your intentions speak for themselves. That if you're kind, fair, and generous, people will recognize it. But they don't. People don't respond to your inner world. They respond to the image you project. And if your image says, I'm harmless, I won't push back, I'll stay quiet, then no matter how deep your heart runs, you'll be overlooked. Because in the real world, being good isn't enough. You must be seen as someone who commands space and not just occupies it. Machiavelli understood this brutal law. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you really are. That's not cynicism. That's survival. You can have the purest character, the most noble motives, but if your posture lacks strength, people will assume you're weak. And the weak, in the eyes of the world, aren't protected. They're used. Your softness will be mistaken for fragility, your silence for ignorance, your patience for powerlessness. So what do? You stop living in the illusion that people will figure it out. You start crafting not just your actions, but your presence, your posture, your energy. Because control doesn't begin with domination. It begins with perception, the way you walk into a room, the way you hold your boundaries, the way you speak, not to be heard, but to be remembered. You don't have to become someone else. You just have to stop hiding who you are behind a mask of acceptability. And here's where most men fail. They think being seen means becoming loud. It doesn't. It means becoming aligned. Who you are inside must match what people experience outside. Integrity is not about being agreeable, it's about being undeniable. And that requires a shift from trying to be liked to learning how to be felt. Because only then will your generosity have weight. Only then will your kindness have power. And if this is starting to click for you, if you're realizing just how much you've traded your strength for approval, then you're already ahead of most. What we're doing here isn't surface-level advice. It's transformation. It's strategy for the kind of man who's tired of losing quietly. So if that's you, if this is hitting where it needs to, then this space is yours. Subscribe, not as a favor, but because no one else is offering you tools like this without a price tag. And what's coming next? It changes everything. When Machiavelli described the ideal ruler, he didn't reach for saints or scholars. He reached for predators. He said the prince must be a blend of two animals, the fox and the lion. The fox, for cunning, for subtlety, for knowing when to act and when to disappear. The lion, for strength, presence, and the raw power to strike when necessary. Because in a world that rewards strategy, not sincerity, virtue is not about being gentle. It's about knowing which mask to wear and when to drop it. Most men choose only one. They either become too soft, always calculating, but never confronting, or too aggressive, always forcing, never adapting. But the man who masters both, he becomes untouchable, because he can disappear in a crowd or dominate a room. He can outthink manipulation and overpower intimidation. And that balance, between diplomacy and decisiveness, is what Machiavelli called virtù. Not virtue in the moral sense, but in the Roman sense: courage, will, mastery of self. This is where modern men get lost. They think being good is enough to protect them. But Machiavelli warned, if you are good at all times, you will be destroyed. Not because goodness is wrong, but because the world is full of those who aren't playing by the same rules. If you lead with innocence, you become prey. If you lead with both foresight and force, you become respected and then feared when necessary. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. So ask yourself, in your life, at work, in relationships, in conflict, are you more fox or more lion? Do you know when to withhold, when to strike, when to vanish? Or do you default to what's comfortable, always hoping your decency will shield you from hard truths? Because this metaphor isn't just about politics, it's about presence. Every man is called at some point to wear the fur of the fox and the roar of the lion, not to harm others, but to protect himself from being devoured. And here's the real paradox. When you embody both, you don't need to prove anything. Your aura speaks for you. People feel it, even if they can't name it. But most never get there. They cling to the idea that being purely good is enough, that cruelty and control are for others. They never learn that sometimes power doesn't corrupt, it protects. And this leads us to a dangerous lie, one that has kept millions of men from owning their authority: the belief that you must choose between being kind or being strong. Somewhere along the way, you were sold a lie, that strength and goodness can't coexist, that if you're firm, you're cruel, that if you're assertive, you're dangerous. So you chose the safer image, the more palatable version of yourself. You kept your tone soft, your needs hidden, your anger buried, and maybe people said you were easy to be around, but deep down, something in you knew you were disappearing, because being easy isn't the same as being whole. Machiavelli dismantled this false choice. He understood that life isn't black and white, it's strategic. A man can be fair without being submissive. He can be generous without being manipulated. He can lead without asking permission. The world doesn't need more men pretending to be harmless. It needs more men who are clear, who know when to yield and when to stand their ground, who don't confuse silence with peace or avoidance with virtue. Here's the truth you've felt, but maybe never heard. Being feared isn't about cruelty. It's about certainty. People respect those who draw clear lines and hold them. Not because they're aggressive, but because they're centered. The man who knows who he is and doesn't apologize for it is the one who commands space. And the moment you stop explaining your strength, it begins to speak for itself. This doesn't mean becoming a tyrant. You don't need to raise your voice or dominate every room, but you do need to stop shrinking. Stop negotiating your self-respect just to maintain an image of niceness. Because niceness without power is ignored. It's the lion declawed, the fox muzzled. You can be kind. You can be compassionate. But if those qualities aren't anchored in self-respect, they'll rot into passivity. And that passivity will cost you everything. So no, you don't have to choose between being a good man and a strong one. In fact, the only way to truly be good is to become someone who doesn't need to be liked to do what's right. And that path begins with a shift, from pleasing to leading, from apologizing to asserting. And that means learning how to say something most men fear: this is who I am and I won't shrink to be accepted. Now let's make that practical, because theory is useless unless you know how to live it. Breaking free from the nice guy script doesn't mean becoming someone you're not. It means returning to who you were before you were trained to disappear, before every yes was automatic, before every disagreement felt like a threat to your identity. This isn't about turning cold, it's about turning inward, reconnecting with a voice you've spent years silencing. The one that says enough, the one that says no, the one that remembers you matter too. The first step is simple, but not easy. Honor your inner signals, that tightening in your chest when you're being disrespected. That's your dignity asking you to speak, that urge to say no followed by guilt. That's your truth, buried under years of people-pleasing. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty, he was teaching discernment. You don't need to be liked by everyone, you need to be respected by the right ones, and that begins the moment you stop performing. Look closely at who resists your growth, who accuses you of changing the second you start setting boundaries, who calls you selfish when you stop being convenient. These aren't people losing a friend, they're people losing control. And that discomfort, it's a compass. It shows you exactly who benefited from your silence, from your guilt, from your fear of being seen as too much. That fear isn't yours, it was handed to you. Return it. You don't need to become harsh to stop being small. You just need to stop seeking permission to exist fully. Your anger, when grounded, is not a threat, it's a signal. Your boundaries are not punishments, they're invitations to real connection. When you stop over-explaining, apologizing, diluting yourself to be palatable, something strange happens. People start listening differently. Your presence thickens. Your words weigh more. Not because they're louder, but because they finally come from center. This isn't about ego, it's about clarity. You are not here to be everyone's favorite version of you. You're here to become someone you can look in the mirror and respect. That kind of man doesn't need validation to sleep well. He doesn't need applause to feel alive. He walks with quiet certainty. Not because everyone loves him, but because he stopped needing them to. And now, we step into what all of this was leading toward. Not just authority over others, but true freedom within. Most men are not trapped by others. They're trapped inside their own silence. A silence that started small. A moment of doubt, a little fear of rejection, and slowly grew into a habit, a way of life. They learned to trade authenticity for approval, to abandon their instincts to avoid conflict, and over time the world didn't have to control them. They did it themselves, carefully, quietly, convincingly, but inside they were starving, because no amount of validation can feed a man who's betrayed himself. Emotional freedom doesn't begin with a rebellion against the world. It begins with a refusal to betray your own center. Machiavelli didn't write for the morally perfect. He wrote for the awake, for those who could see the hidden rules beneath social niceties, who understood that real influence doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being grounded. If you're always adjusting, always guessing, always asking, am I allowed to say this? You're not free. You're still waiting for permission. And here's the truth. No one says out loud. No one is coming to liberate you. The world doesn't reward quiet compliance. It respects self-possession. It respects men who can walk away without explanation, who don't need to beg to be understood, who are willing to be misread because their peace is no longer up for negotiation. That's not arrogance, that's emotional sovereignty. You'll know you're free when your silence is no longer a defense mechanism, but a choice. When your boundaries don't need to be justified. When your presence no longer shrinks in the face of tension, but expands. And most of all, when your worth is no longer borrowed from other people's approval, but anchored in your own clarity. That's when you stop chasing roles and start embodying reality. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's the calm that comes when you realize your emotions are yours, not something others get to manipulate, demand, or punish. It's what happens when you stop outsourcing your identity and start reclaiming it one decision at a time. And this leads us to the final question, the one that has split men for centuries. Will you choose to be loved, or will you choose to be free? At some point, every man must face this choice, whether to keep molding himself into what others approve, or to become who he truly is, even if that means walking alone. One path brings temporary warmth, the comfort of fitting in, the illusion of acceptance. The other path brings something deeper, not comfort, but sovereignty, the right to belong to yourself. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He who seeks only to be loved will lose himself in the desires of others, but he who commands his own nature becomes ungovernable. You were not born to be agreeable. You were not built to be digestible. The world is already full of men who have folded themselves to avoid judgment, who measure their worth by how well they please, how little they disturb, how quickly they disappear. But freedom has never belonged to the agreeable. It has always belonged to the bold, to those who stop asking who they're allowed to be and start becoming it without permission. This doesn't mean living in rebellion. It means living in alignment. It means trusting that your clarity is worth more than their comfort. That your voice, steady, grounded, unapologetic, is not a threat but a signal. a signal that you are done begging for space in a world that only respects those who take it. The moment you stop performing, stop negotiating your worth, stop bending your truth, is the moment everything changes. You may lose people, you may be misunderstood, but what you gain, presence, dignity, direction, will outweigh anything you leave behind. Because freedom isn't the absence of struggle, it's the refusal to betray yourself to avoid it. And that refusal? It's not taught in schools, it's earned through fire, through silence, through the moment you say, I will not be ruled, not by them, not by fear, not by the need to be liked. So here's your final test. Keep living to be loved, and you'll always feel like something's missing. Or choose to be free, and become the kind of man this world no longer knows how to ignore. If you're ready to live like that, subscribe. Because this path demands constant reminders of who you really are, and every video here is a mirror, a weapon, a key. Use it well.